Hello and welcome to the Digital ACE Quality Assuring the implementation of your digital provision. I'm going to run through a few slides today. I'm going to give you an opportunity for some think time as well. And hopefully you'll be able to share some of these thoughts with others and use your built shared experience to really gain more confidence in quality assuring your delivery of your digital curriculum. So what we're going to be looking at is particularly the implementation of your digital provision in teaching, learning and assessment. And in previous sessions, what people have found really helpful is things that link directly to Ofsted, as you can imagine. And so we're going to cover some of that off today. So as you'll be aware, the Digital ACE project is about designing a support programme for adult community education providers to help them in their next stage of the technological journey that we've all been on, and the way in which we've had to learn and develop and continue to learn and develop into the next stage to build our capability, capacity, and enhance the offer that we're providing for our learners, whilst trying to maintain that learner-centred approach that we're so proud of in the quality of our adult learning. So the purpose of this session really is to take stock and say, by the end of this session, what are the things that we want to try and achieve? So you should be able to consider a variety of methods to quality assure the digital learning environment, identify what to quality assure for your online teaching, learning and assessment, and understand actually why that's important, and implement approaches that will enable you to quality assure teaching, learning and assessment online. So what I've done with other groups as we've done these live sessions is start a poll. And it's a really good way of just gauging where you are at this moment in time without thinking too much about it. Just immediately your first thought on how confident are you when quality assuring your online environment? So whether you're sitting there in a small group watching this, whether you're sharing it with a team online, or whether you're looking at this as an individual on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is really confident and 0 is not so confident, just consider where you are right at this point in time and just jot that down and just make a note of where you are at this moment in time on how confident you are when quality assuring your online environment. Second question, how confident are you in quality assuring teaching, learning, assessment online? So one is obviously about the environment you're creating. The next is about actually what's happening in the classroom, the digital provision that you've put on, the platform, whatever that is. And the next one is, how easy has it been for you to transfer your approaches to the quality assuring of online provision compared to what you were doing when it was classroom based? So from a 0 where it's not very easy at all to 10 where you found it really easy, just gauge yourself on those parameters for now. Just gives you a measure of where you feel you are now and whether we can actually help build up your confidence through a few slides and through you having the opportunity to think about the progress you've actually already made. So if we look at the EIF, and the bit we're looking at in particular is implementation. So let's just have a look at the education spectrum framework and say, okay, so if we're focusing in on implementation, that's curriculum delivery, that's the teaching, the pedagogical practice that's in place, assessment, formative and summative. We're going to look at how that impacts on a digital learning provision. We're going to look at, is it that easy to implement the same teaching practices as you would have done in the classroom? And how easy is it to quality assure the assessment practices that are now taking place in a virtual environment? So when we look at the first thing, quality assuring the digital learning environment, this is a really important aspect just to differentiate what environment we've created and what's important. Let's just reflect on Ofsted. Ofsted went out and did several mini inspections, reviews, if you like, on providers during COVID-19. They went out in the first lockdown and then they went out again in November. And this is really based on some of their distance travelled that they saw, because I thought it'd be helpful to look at the learning that had taken place so that we can again use that best practice and what they'd seen people were finding easier. So what they've said is that what they found is that providers were using a variety of platforms for specific learner groups or subject areas. However, the challenge remained how this would be quality assured for consistency, and that is a challenge. And I know that many of you are using different platforms, or you may have restrictions on the type of platforms that you're using. But some of the justification for using those platforms is because your learner groups can relate easier to certain platforms than others. They can access them more easily through mobile devices or through different technology that they have access to, or simply because the product, the platform you're using is much more accessible to certain groups. But the challenge remains, how do you quality assure this for consistency when you've got lots of people using lots and lots of different platforms? It's all built around those principles in the first place of what is it that your digital learning environment is setting out to create when you implement it. So you might have different platforms, but actually, if you think about why you're implementing it, it will help you to quality assure it for consistency. So as a group, if you're watching this with a couple of others or individually, just spend a moment to think about and write notes on what are some of the quality indicators that apply to any digital environment, regardless of the platform and the nature of that. So just spend a little moment thinking about that. Pause the video, just spend some time reflecting for a moment on what are some of those quality indicators. Okay, so let's just have a look at some of those that you talked about. So if you were observing a course and you've decided on your quality criteria based on what we said were important factors in any digital learning environment, and the types of things I'm sure you've got on your list are inclusive, accessible, safe, supportive, interactive, flexible, engaging, and any others from your own list that you've just made. And just consider what you would expect to see in that learning environment. What is it that would be the evidence that you would capture to demonstrate that what you've created, no matter what the platform, that it is inclusive, it's accessible, it's safe, it's supportive, it's interactive, it's flexible, it's engaging, and so on, with your own thoughts that you've captured and those that you've captured with others. So the important part is when you've captured your thoughts, you start to build that evidence base of the things that are important, the quality criteria that you've put into place when implementing the right digital environment for your learners, which runs across any platform. That way you can start building that consistency of approach, and you build what you believe good looks like when you're implementing an effective learning environment in your digital provision. So if you were observing, spend a moment now thinking about what you would expect to see. What would the evidence look like that demonstrates these approaches? So if we just have a look at what Ofsted have said about quality assuring online teaching, learning and assessment. What is it in the implementation of your digital curriculum that inspectors would say and expect to see when implementation is at its best? So the way in which teachers teach and assess to support learners to build their knowledge and apply that knowledge as skills, those kind of work skills, skills for the next stage of their learning, whatever that looks like and whatever their level or their starting point is. So what Ofsted found in their COVID-19 series of inspections is that learners were much more engaged in live sessions as they could interact with their peers and of course with their tutor. So rather than accessing a digital platform where they are just sourcing materials and working on their own, or having another virtual environment in which they're receiving packs, the higher levels of engagement were in those live sessions where they could meet with their peers and break down some of that social isolation, help their mental health and support each other in their learning. And some of the things that they found were really useful in making judgments on whether learners are actually extending their knowledge and are actually building those skills and knowledge as they go through their digital learning experience. There were things like the quizzes and the polls. I'm sure you've come up with these yourself. chat functions, breakout rooms for smaller groups. Don't forget, you've already created the learning environment and the expectation around safety. So breakout rooms, how you're considering the safeguarding, if you've got breakout rooms into smaller groups. Encouraging learners to use cameras and microphones. Now, these are often some of the triggers that will raise concerns if you've got some learners in your groups that are disengaging. And it doesn't mean that you've got to kind of force people to use cameras and microphones, but just giving them the confidence to access them if they want to, and giving them the access to turn them on and off if they don't want to, and if they feel uncomfortable, having a particularly bad day, or going through some other complex issues that they don't really want to kind of expose everybody to on screen. But equally, you know, it's also about the environment they're sitting in. We have an awful lot of learners from different backgrounds, different settings, different different access to digital resources, and we don't want to isolate people through putting in place things that just make them feel worse. So just consider some of those things that are encouraging learners to be more engaged, the live sessions and those types of things, but let's just remember the sensitivities around some of those as well. Ofsted also set out that recording the sessions helped learners go back over subjects they struggled with previously or missed. A lot of our adults and our young people, for those of us that have young people's provision too, or those with higher needs, quite often what we find is that in the usual context, they may be taking children to school. They may be having the children in nursery. In a COVID context, they may have children at home. So that precious time between 9 and 11 in the morning that they used to have, they may not have anymore. So taking part in live sessions can actually present a barrier if they don't get that space or that time. So creating an opportunity to record, again with the right permissions, does help learners to go back over things if they miss it, if they have to duck out of the session, or if actually they can't attend at that time and want to take part later. The other part was that good practice reflected that developmental sessions for tutors had advanced their digital skills. So when we first went into this situation, we transferred overnight virtually onto online learning. If we'd have told people a year earlier that we were going to be moving everything online, we'd have probably had a 5-year project plan and any number of reasons why we couldn't do it. But in the situation we were thrown in, we virtually did it overnight, and that was an absolutely amazing achievement. You mustn't lose sight of what we've achieved in that time. In that time, you've also been developing your tutors, developing the skills of your support staff, and developing their confidence in using different digital learning methods. And I'm sure we've all got stories of tutors who lack the confidence in using technology, but in this context have excelled and really brought learning to life for people who would have otherwise disengaged. So you know, building people's confidence, encouraging them to using different methods, live streaming where you may end up with some learners in the class, some learners learning from home, but in that combined environment, totally new set of skills, it's a totally new set of confidence to build up in teams, but it has a positive impact on learners and their engagement. Ofsted also set out that the following improvements since March, and don't forget this was the November tranche, were having an impact. And that particularly was teachers and learners were more familiar with online learning and delivery. They'd gained their confidence, they'd become familiar with different methods, different opportunities, things that worked better than others, and they got to know how their learners related to those different technological platforms and strategies that people are putting in place to help their learning build. Providers were putting better systems in place for the technical support, and I think we've all kind of seen how people have adjusted to the type of support that we now need in place, which has shifted from what it looked like previously to that kind of remote, that remote offer and that remote support. And it's encouraging to know that the systems that we've put into place, and that I'm sure you've put into place, are having an impact on supporting learners and staff to achieve these aspirations within a digital environment. And then finally, the other part they saw was that Teams teams had an opportunity to experiment with various options and find solutions that work best for them. That's about building in those flexibilities. Not all learner groups will want to do the same types of things or could access the same types of things. So teams were looking at new ways together to troubleshoot and really kind of find out what solutions would work best for them and that they would feel more comfortable delivering to, and what works better for their learners. Now, all of this should be giving you confidence, because these are all things that you've already done and that you're doing. But sometimes you just need to step back and reflect on the distance that you have travelled before you start to move on to that next stage. Okay, so another just a moment really for you. So what I wanted to try and create here is, in a Zoom session, I'd be kind of splitting you out into groups, breakout rooms and all those sort of things. But in this situation, sometimes what people find in teaching and learning sessions is that tutors are frightened of creating space for learners to be quiet. Whereas in the classroom, you would create space for people to think, space for people to write things down, space for people to work on their own as well as in pairs and groups. And we shouldn't be frightened of doing that in an online digital environment too. So creating quiet and creating a time to think in a digital environment is okay, and it shouldn't feel uncomfortable. But I want you to turn to now, do exactly that, put a pause on, consider the top tip for implementing good online learning environment that would support learners to achieve their aspirations. It will enable them to apply their learning to life and to work. And it would support their mental health and well-being, which has been so critical. You will all be able to cite stories of where learners have told you that you've provided a lifeline to them during very challenging times. And you have supported their mental health and well-being. And it is important to capture that, as well as supporting them in their learning and in their skills development for further work and learning. So what would your quality criteria be for your top tip? How would you measure that? Think about how you would apply this across a range of subject areas. So does your quality criteria work for pottery and community learning, ESOL in your skills for life provision, in your apprenticeships, maybe in your 16 to 19 provision, maybe in your provision for adults with learning difficulties and disabilities? Test your thoughts about the measures and the criteria that you're putting in place. Think about that top tip. How does it transfer to other areas of learning? Consider some of the training needs and support that you would need to put in place for tutors, assessors, support staff when implementing those environments. And also think about the expectation, and I'm only going to mention this once in here, but just think about the expectation on resources when you're considering those quality criteria. Just consider what the impact is on finance, on people's time, and the effort that would be required and the resources that would be required in implementing your quality model. So when reviewing and assessing work remotely, Ofsted reflected that there were many new methods of remote assessment for measuring learner progress and how they were doing on their journey, and they were taking place in a variety of forms. Some of them were online submissions of work through systems such as virtual learning environments, and in some cases email directly to the tutor, who would then provide feedback to inform progress. So it's really important, the feedback piece, making sure that if the learners are engaging and they're sending work in, that there is a turnaround to keep that momentum going. The scenario-based questions were used where knowledge base was not able to be accessible in a real environment. So building on the scenarios of what that work or learning environment would look like. Online questions through polls helped to get instant feedback on learners' knowledge and understanding. Online questions through polls and other methods, depending on your platforms that you're using. But a really good gauge of just a quick, get them to take part, but a quick way of seeing where they're at. Learners are always asked to prepare presentations, take part in online discussions, take part in small group activity and video call to capture their progress. Really useful in tutorials, really useful in those online discussions to see how people are building their confidence, to see how their learning is transferring into skills and embedded deepened understanding and knowledge. And then online assessments are undertaken identifying skills gaps. That would inform course planning. So what was going on here is that they, as you are, I'm sure, they were looking at gaps that had emerged from in skills from the last lockdown to the current situation, which was the November 2nd lockdown. So what they were saying is, we'd noticed gaps had emerged in people's skills. So now we were planning our courses to make up those skills gaps during this second phase. So it's really important around sequencing of the curriculum and front loading certain work to ensure that those gaps are being filled early on. The other part was around written testimonials. Professional discussions, recorded observations were also used, particularly in vocational qualifications and apprenticeships, where this would be expected as part of endpoint assessment, for example. So that was what they found was helping, and what the digital environment was creating in implementing assessment methodology in a new environment. So just consider for a moment what's worked well for you. Is it some of these things? Is it different things? Is it different things for different groups? But let's be clear on what's working well for you in different groups and what has worked less well. What can you learn from what's worked less well? And how can you change and adapt that to create something that is not just best practice, but next practice? Okay, so that's kind of a little summary of where we've got to. I want you now to sort of think about how confident do you now feel about quality assuring your online learning environment. Now that you've had a chance to have a little bit of input from the Ofsted findings, you've had a little bit of think time, hopefully, and done some of those activities. Hopefully now you will have shifted slightly in your confidence level, because what you will have seen in here is that a lot of what you're doing is what Ofsted has seen as good practice. So take some confidence in that. How confident do you feel right now about quality assuring your online teaching, learning and assessment? And I'm sure you've got some really good practice around that you've identified too. And then how easy will it be now to adapt your online approaches? Have you got some new ideas? Have you got some new shared thinking? Have you got some opportunities that you want to pull to the forefront to say, actually, I'm going to give this a go? It might just help just to see what Ofsted saw was good practice and see how you can apply that to your own. And even if it sparks an idea, so that some of those might not be relevant to all of your contexts, but see if some of them work and how you can adapt them for quality assuring the implementation of your provision. So hopefully by the end of this session, you will be able to, and have we achieved that in this short amount of time together, consider a variety of methods to quality assure the digital environment. So the digital learning environment you've created, have we managed to secure some of those quality assurance methods that would enable you to demonstrate that? Have we managed to identify what to quality assure when you're looking at your online teaching, learning assessment? Do we understand now why that's important? The learner journey, the progress, the health and well-being of learners. When we're implementing approaches after this session, have we actually looked at how we can enable each other to quality assure teaching, learning, and assessment in different ways through our online digital provision? Hopefully you've been able to see some of the methods that Ofsted have put into place. Maybe you're working through this as a group and you're getting your collective ideas, which is always a great way to build next practice. And hopefully you've had a little bit of think time just to try and sort out what have we already done and what do we want to do next to further improve. So thank you very much for tuning in, and been a pleasure to be with you as ever, and wish you well in your digital provision. and good luck for the future. And hopefully we'll see you very, very soon. Take care. Bye.